Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It is a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. Lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast intending to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night, or sometimes background noise or company, for me to be here with you, without any pressure of the end coming. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The primary idea is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to help you to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for you. Or maybe you need something a little bit different. Maybe you just need some kind of background noise. Some people like the sound of the ocean, or wind in the trees, or the sound of the rain. And some people, for better or worse, just like the sound of a boring dude droning on in the background. As you're listening to the show, don't force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of my story, on my voice, and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode. But it's important you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, this actually probably won't work. I recommend giving it a solid 3 nights to get used to it. To get used to listening to my voice, my maybe slightly strange accent, the strangeness of letting someone talk to you while you sleep. Or maybe at first one episode just isn't long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep. Maybe you wake up in the middle of the night. What I recommend in that case is let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes, put them in a playlist. When you go to bed, hit play and let them go. That way, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you can just carry on listening and allow yourself to go straight back to sleep again. And you can even do the same thing if you're one of those who wakes up before the alarm, 60 minutes or as little as 30 minutes. Just carry on listening, drift off again. And you may wonder what the point is. What good is an extra 30 minutes of sleep? But I've had multiple people actually thank me for this suggestion, because there is something about allowing complete relaxation before the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new, deep level. And it's important as you listen that you just try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you. So give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to ask for a couple of minutes of your time. Reminder, of course, about our partnership with Magic Mind. They're a matcha-based energy product to enhance your energy and day-to-day concentration. I was sent some to try out because I'm not going to recommend a product I can't stand by, and they also insisted on making sure I got it before we entered this partnership. And I tried it out and I was very impressed with it. It's a small bottle that can easily be swigged in a couple of sips. You can also add it to milk or smoothies or water, whatever suits you. But I enjoyed the fruity, herby flavor, so I stuck with having it as a shot with my morning coffee. From the first day I felt the effect. I wouldn't say it gave me a buzz, but I did feel noticeably sharper and more focused. And as I've been taking it daily as part of my morning ritual, I've definitely felt the benefits of the product. I know everyone listening here is an insomniac like I am. So even after a not great night's sleep, it still gives me an extra spring in my step for a good chunk of the next day and helps me to keep focused on my work. I can happily recommend Magic Mind to the sleep-deprived or people needing help to focus. Magic Mind has a great offer to Sleepy Time Tales listeners. If you go to magicmind.co/sleepytales and enter the code SleepyTales20 at checkout, you will get a 20% discount on all purchases. It's also worth seriously considering signing up to their subscription service. You'll get even bigger discounts on that. Info for everything is in the show notes as usual, but a reminder that the link is magicmind.co/sleepytales with the code SleepyTales20. Thanks again to Magic Mind for the support, and if you make a purchase, please let me know. Tag me on social media and tag them as well so that they know that I sent you. And if you'd like to support Sleepy Time Tales, to help me keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs like you, please consider supporting it Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that helps me keep the lights on, but gets you fun bonuses based on how much you contribute. From as little as $2 a month, you get weekly access to early releases on the main episodes, so that you get your fresh sleep aid on a Wednesday instead of a Sunday. And $5 a month gets you weekly bonus minisodes, special edits, and a monthly megasode, which is all of the previous month's releases in one big listen. And of course, if monthly is a big ask, you can make once-off tips through the tip jar on the website. You can also get some merchandise from the TeePublic store, and also simply by spreading the word, you can help me to reach new people. We can work together to help people to improve their lives. And I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you for the time. Let's get back to the show. From Astronomy, The Science of Heavenly Bodies, by David P. Todd. Chapter 17. Bradley and Aberration. Living at Kew in London early in the 18th century was an enthusiastic young astronomer, James Bradley. He is famous chiefly for his accurate observations of star places, which have been invaluable to astronomers of later epochs in ascertaining the proper motions of stars. The latitude of Bradley's house in Kew was very nearly the same as the declination of the bright star Gamma Draconis, so that it passed through his zenith once every day. Bradley had a zenith sector, and with this he observed, with the greatest care, the zenith distance of Gamma Draconis at every possible opportunity. This he did by pointing the telescope on the star, and then recording the small angle of its inclination to a fine plumb line. So accurate were his measures that he was probably certain of the star's position to the nearest second of arc. What he hoped to find was the star's motion around a very slight orbit once each year, and due to the Earth's motion in its orbit round the Sun. In other words, he sought to find the star's parallax if it turned out to be a measurable quantity. It is just as well now that his method of observation proved insufficiently delicate to reveal the parallax of Gamma Draconis. But his assiduity in observation led him to an unexpected discovery of greater moment at that time. What he really found was that the star had a regular annual orbit, but wholly different from what he expected, and very much larger in amount. This result was most puzzling to Bradley. The law of relative motion would require that the star's motion in its expected orbit should be opposite to that of the Earth in its annual orbit, instead of which the star was all the time at right angles to the Earth's motion. Bradley was a frequent traveller by boat on the Thames, and the apparent change in the direction of the wind when the boat was in motion is said to have suggested to him what caused the displacement of Gamma Draconis. The progressive motion of light had been roughly ascertained by rumour. Let that be the velocity of the wind. And the Earth's motion in its orbit round the Sun, let that be the speed of the boat. Then as the wind, to an observer on the boat, always seemed to come from a point in advance of the point it actually proceeds from, to an observer at rest. So the star should be constantly thrown forward by an angle given by the relation of the velocity of light to the speed of the Earth in orbital revolution around the Sun. The apparent places of all stars are affected in this manner, and this displacement is called the aberration of light. Astronomers since Bradley's discovery of aberration in 1726 have devoted a great deal of attention to this astronomical constant, as it is called, and the arc value of it is very nearly 20 degrees 0.5. This means that light travels more than 10,000 times as fast as the Earth in its orbit, 186,330 miles per second, as against the Earth's 18.5. And we can ascertain the Sun's distance by aberration also, because the exact values of the velocity of light and of the constant of aberration, when properly combined, give the exact orbital speed of the Earth. And this furnishes directly by geometry the radius of the Earth's orbit, that is, the distance of the Sun. In fact, this is one of the more accurate modern methods of ascertaining the distance of the Sun. As early as 1880, it enabled the writer to calculate the Sun's parallax, equal to 8.8 degrees, a value absolutely identical with that adopted by the Paris Conference of 1896, and now universally accepted as the standard. In whatever part of the sky we observe, every star is affected by aberration. At the poles of the ecliptic, 23.5 degrees from the Earth's poles, the annual aberration orbits of the stars are very small circles, 41 degrees in diameter. Toward the ecliptic, the aberration orbits become more and more oval, ellipses in fact of greater and greater eccentricity, but with their major axes all of the same length, until we reach the ecliptic itself, and then the ellipse is flattened into a straight line, 41 degrees in length, in which the star travels forth and back once a year. Exact correspondence of the aberration ellipses of the stars with the annual motion of the Earth round the Sun affords indisputable proof of this motion. And as every star partakes of the movement, this proof of our motion round the Sun becomes many millionfold. Indeed, if we were to push a little further the refinement of our analysis of the effect of aberration on stellar positions, we could prove also the rotation of the Earth on its axis, because that motion is swift enough to bear an appreciable ratio to the velocity of light. Diurnal aberration is the term applied to this slight effect, and as every star partakes of it, demonstration of the Earth's turning around on its axis becomes many millionfold also. Chapter 18. The Telescope. Had anyone told Ptolemy that his Earth-centered system of sun, moon, and stars would ultimately be overthrown, not by philosophy, but by the overwhelming evidence furnished by a little optical instrument which so aided the human eye that could actually see systems of bodies in revolution around each other in the sky, he would no doubt have vehemently denied that any such thing was possible. To be sure, it took 14 centuries to bring this about, and the discovery even then was without much doubt due to accident. Through all this long period when astronomy may be said to have merely existed, practically without any forward step or development, its devotees were unequipped with the sort of instruments which were requisite to make the advance possible. There were astrolabes and armillary spheres, with crudely divided circles, and the excellent work done with them only shows the genius of many of the early astronomers who had nothing better to work with. Regarding star places made with instruments fixed in the meridian, Bessel, often called the father of practical astronomy, used to say that even if you provided a bad observer with the best of instruments, a genius could surpass him with a gun barrel and a cartwheel. Before the days of telescopes, that is prior to the 17th century, it was not known whether any of the planets except the Earth had a moon or not. Consequently, the masses of these planets were but very imperfectly ascertained. The phases of Mercury and Venus were merely conjectured. What were the actual dimensions of the planets could only be guessed at. The approximate distances of sun, moon, and planets were little better than guesses. The distances of the stars were wildly inaccurate, and the positions of the stars on the celestial sphere, and of the sun, moon, and planets among them, were far removed from modern standards of precision. All because the telescope had not yet become available as an optical adjunct to increase the power of the human eye, and to enable it to see as if distances were in considerable measure annihilated. Galileo, almost universally, is said to have been the inventor of the telescope. But intimate research into the question would appear to give the honor of that original invention to another, in another country. What Galileo deserves the highest praise for, however, is the reinvention, independently, of an optic tube by which he could bring distant objects apparently much nearer to him. And being an astronomer, he was by universal acknowledgment first of all men to turn a telescope on the heavenly bodies. This was in the year 1609, and his first discovery was the phase of Venus, his second, the 4 Medicean moons or satellites of Jupiter. Discoveries which at that epoch were of the highest significance in establishing the truth of the Copernican system beyond the shadow of doubt. But the first telescopes of which we have record were made, so far as can now be ascertained, in Holland, very early in the 17th century. Matthias, a professor of mathematics, and Janssen and Lepperhe, who were opticians in Middelburg, all three are entitled to consideration as claimants of the original invention of the telescope. But that such an instrument was pretty well known would appear to be shown by his government's refusal of a patent to Lepperhe in 1608. While the officials, recognizing the value of such an instrument for purposes of war, got him to construct several telescopes and ordered him to keep the invention a secret. Within a year, Galileo heard that an instrument was in use in Holland, by which it was possible to see distant objects as if near at hand. Skilled in optics as he was, the reinvention was a task neither long nor difficult for him. One of his first instruments magnified but 3 times. Still, it made a great sensation in Venice, wherein he exhibited the little tube to the authorities of that city, in which he first invented it. Galileo's telescope was of the simplest type, with but 2 lenses. The one, a double convex lens, with which an image of the distant object is formed. The other, a double concave lens, much smaller, which was the eye lens for examining the image. It is this simple form of Galilean telescope that is still used in opera glasses and field glasses, because of the shorter tube necessary. Galileo carried on the construction of telescopes, all the time improving their quality and enlarging their power, until he built one that magnified 30 times. What the diameter of the object glass was we do not know, perhaps 2 inches or little more. Glass of a quality good enough to make a telescope cannot have been abundant or even obtainable except with great difficulty in those early days. Other discoveries by this first of celestial observers were the spots on the sun, the larger mountains of the moon, the separate stars of which the Milky Way is composed, and greatest wonder of all, the anomalous handles, and say he called them, of Saturn, which we now know as the planet's ring, the most wonderful of all the bodies in the sky. Since Galileo's time, only 3 centuries past, the progress in size and improvement in quality of the telescopes have been marvelous, and this advance would not have been possible, except for first, the discovery still kept in large part secret by the makers of optical glass, which have enabled them to make discs of the largest size. Second, the consummate skill of modern opticians in fashioning these discs into perfect lenses. And third, the progress in the mechanical arts and engineering, by which telescope tubes of many tons weight are mounted or poised so delicately that the thrust of a finger barely swerves them from one point of the heavens to another. As the telescope is the most important of all astronomical instruments, it is necessary to understand its construction and adjustment, and how the astronomer uses it. Telescopes are optical instruments, and nothing but optical parts would be requisite in making them. If only the optical conditions of their perfect working could be obtained without other mechanical accessories. In original principle, all telescopes are as simple as Galileo's. First, an object glass to form the image of the distant object. Second, the eyepiece, usually made of 2 lenses, but really a microscope to magnify that image, and working in the same way that any microscope magnifies an object close at hand. And third, a tube to hold all the necessary lenses in the true relative positions. The focal lengths of object glass and eyepiece will determine just what distance apart the lenses must be in order to give perfect vision. But it is quite as important that the axes of all the lenses be adjusted into one in the same straight line, and then held there rigidly and permanently. Otherwise, vision with a telescope will be very imperfect and wholly unsatisfactory. The distance from the objective or object glass to its focal point is called its focal length. And if we divide this by the focal length of the eyepiece, we shall have the magnifying power of the telescope. The eyepiece will usually be made of 2 lenses or more, and we use its focal length considered as a single lens in getting the magnifying power. A telescope will generally have many eyepieces of different focal lengths, so that it will have a corresponding range of magnifying powers. The lowest magnifying power will be not less than 4 or 5 diameters for each inch of aperture of the objective. Otherwise, the eye will fail to receive all the light which falls upon the glass. A 4-inch telescope will therefore have no eyepiece with a lower magnifying power than about 20 diameters. The highest magnifying power advantageous for a glass of this size will be about 250 to 300. The working rule being about 70 diameters to each inch of aperture, although the theoretical limit is regarded as 100. The reason for a variety of eyepieces with different magnifying powers soon becomes apparent on using the telescope. Comets and nebulae call for very low powers, while double stars and the planetary surfaces require the higher powers, provided the state of the atmosphere at the moment will allow it. If there is much quivering and unsteadiness, nothing is gained by trying the higher powers, because all the waves of unsteadiness are magnified also in the same proportion, and sharpness of vision, or fine definition, or good seeing as it is called, becomes impossible. The vibrations and tremors of the atmosphere are the greatest of all obstacles to astronomical observation, and the search is always in order for regions of the world, in deserts or in high mountains, where the quietest atmosphere is to be found. Quite another power of the telescope is dependent on its objective solely, its light-gathering power. Light by which we see a star or planet is admitted to the retina of the eye through an adjustable aperture called the pupil. In the dark, or at night, the pupil expands to an average diameter of 1/4 of an inch. But the object glass of a telescope, by focusing the rays from a star, pours into the eye, almost as a funnel acts with water, all the light which falls on its larger surface. And as geometry has settled it for us that areas of a surface are proportioned to the squares of their diameters, a 2-inch object glass focuses upon the retina of the eye 64 times as much light as the unassisted eye would receive. And the great 40-inch objective of the Yerkes telescope would theoretically yield 25,600 times as much light as the eye alone. But there would be a noticeable percentage of this lost through absorption by the glasses of the telescope and scattering by their surfaces. The first makers of telescopes soon encountered a most discouraging difficulty, because it seemed to them absolutely insuperable. This is known as chromatic aberration, or the scattering of light in a telescope due simply to its color or wavelength. When light passes through a prism, red is refracted the least and violet the most. Through a lens is the same, because a lens may be regarded as an indefinite system of prisms. The image of a star or planet, then, formed by a single lens, cannot be optically perfect. Instead, it will be a confused intermingling of images of various colors. With low powers, this will not be very troublesome, but great indistinctness results from the use of higher magnifying powers. The early makers and users of telescopes in the latter part of the 17th century found that the troublesome effects of chromatic aberration could be much reduced by increasing the focal length of the objective. This led to what we term engineering difficulties of a very serious nature, because the tubes of great length were very awkward in pointing towards celestial objects, especially near the zenith, where the air is quietest. And it was next to impossible to hold an object steadily in the field, even after all the troubles of getting it there had been successfully overcome. Bianchini and Cassini, Hevelius and Huygens were among the active observers of that epoch, who built telescopes of extraordinary length, 100 feet and upward. One tube is said to have been built 600 feet in length, but quite certainly it could never have been used. So-called aerial telescopes were also constructed, in which the objective was mounted on top of a tower or a pole, and the eyepiece moved along near the ground. But it is difficult to see how anything but fleeting glimpses of the heavenly bodies could have been obtained with such contrivances, even if the lenses had been perfect. Newton, indeed, who was expert in optics, gave up the problem of improving the refracting telescope and turned his energies towards the reflector. In 1733, half a century after Newton, and a century and a quarter after Galileo, Chester Moore Hall, an Englishman, found by experiment that chromatic aberration could be nearly eliminated by making the objective of 2 lenses instead of 1. And the same invention was made independently by Dolland, an English optician, who took out Letters patent about 1760. So the size of telescopes seemed to be limited only by the skill of the glassmaker, and the size of discs that he might find it practicable to produce. What Hall and Dolland did was to make the outer or crown lens of the objective as before, and place behind it a planar concave lens of dense flint glass. This had the effect of neutralizing the chromatic effect, or color aberration, while at the same time only part of the refractive effect of the crown lens was destroyed. This ingenious but costly combination prepared the way for the great refracting telescopes of the present day, because it solved, or seemed to solve, the important problem of getting the necessary refraction of light rays without harmful dispersion or decomposition of them. Through the 18th century and the first years of the 17th, many telescopes of a size very great for that day were built, and their success seemed complete. With a large increase in the size of the discs, however, a new trouble arose, quite inherent in the glass itself. The 2 kinds of glass, flint and crown, do not decompose white light with uniformity, so that when the so-called achromatic objective was composed of flint and crown, there was an effect known as irrationality of dispersion, or secondary spectrum, which produced a very troublesome residuum of blue light surrounding the images of bright objects. This is the most serious defect of all the great refractors of the day, and effectively, it limits their size to about 60 inches of aperture, with present types of flint and crown. It is expected by present experimenters, however, that further improvements in optical glass will do much to extend this limit, so that a refracting telescope of much greater size than any now in existence will be practicable. Improvements in mounting telescopes, too, are still possible. Within recent years, Hartness of Springfield, Vermont, has erected a new and ingenious type of turret telescope, which protects the observer from wind and cold while his instrument is outside. It affords exceptional facilities for rapid and convenient observing, as for variable stars, and is adaptable to both refractors and reflectors. The captivating study of the heavens can of course be begun with the naked eye alone, but very moderate optical assistance is a great help and stimulates. An opera glass affords such assistance. A field glass does still better, and best of all, for certain purposes, as a modern prism binocular. Chapter 19. Mirror telescopes. Cherished with the utmost care in the rooms of the Royal Society of London is a world-famous telescope, a diminutive reflector made by the hands of Sir Isaac Newton. We have already mentioned his connection with the refractor, and how he abandoned that type of telescope in favor of the reflecting mirror, a reflector in which the obstacles to great size appeared to be purely mechanical. By many, indeed, Newton is regarded as the inventor of the reflector. By the principles of optics, all the rays from a star that strike a concave mirror will be reflected to the geometric focal point, provided a section of that mirror is a parabola. Such a mirror is called a speculum, and is an alloy of tin, copper, and bismuth. Its surface takes a very high polish, reflecting when newly polished nearly 70% of the light that falls upon it. But the focus where the eyepiece must be used is in front of the mirror, and if the eye were placed there, the observer's head would intercept all or much of the light that would otherwise reach the mirror. Gregory, probably the real inventor of the reflector, was the first to dodge this difficulty by perforating the mirror at the center and applying the eyepiece there, at the back of the speculum. But it was necessary to first send the rays to the point of reflection from a second or smaller mirror in the optical axis of the speculum. This reflects the rays backward down the tube to the eyepiece or spectroscope or camera. Another English optician, Cassegrain, improved on this design somewhat by placing the secondary mirror inside the focus of the speculum, or nearer to it, so that the tube is shorter. This form is preferable for many kinds of astronomical work, especially photography. Herschel sought to do away with the secondary reflector entirely, and save the loss of light by tilting the speculum slightly, so as to throw the image at one side of the tube. But this modification introduces bad definition of the image and has never been much used. A better plan is that of Newton, who placed a small plane speculum at an angle of 45 degrees in the optical axis, where the secondary mirror of the Gregory Cassegrainian type is placed. The rays are then received by the eyepiece at the side of the upper end of the tube, the observer looking in at right angles to the axis. And a modern improvement first used by Draper is a small rectangular prism in place of the little plane speculum, effecting a saving of 5 to 10% of the light. It is not easy to say which type of telescope, the refractor or the reflector, is the more famous, nor which is the better or more useful, or the more likely to lead in the astronomy of the future. When the successors of Dollond had carried the achromatic reflector to the limit enforced by the size of the glass discs they were able to secure, they found these instruments not so great an improvement after all. The single-lens telescopes of great focal length were nearly as good optically, though much more awkward to handle but the quality of the glass obtainable in that day appeared to set an arbitrary limit to the great amplification of size and power which progress in observational astronomy demanded. Then came the elder Herschel, best known and perhaps the greatest of all astronomers. At Bath, England, music was his profession, especially the organ. But he was dissatisfied with his little Gregorian reflector, and being a very clever mechanician, he set out to build a reflector for himself. It is said that he cast and polished nearly 200 mirrors in the course of experiments on the most highly reflective type of alloys, and the sort of mechanism that would enable him to give them the highest polish. In all his work he was ably and enthusiastically aided by his sister, Caroline Herschel, most famous of all women astronomers. Upward in size of his mirrors he advanced, till he had a speculum of 2 feet diameter, with a tube 20 feet long. 12 to 15 years had elapsed, when in 1781, while testing one of these reflectors on stars in the constellation Gemini, he made the first discovery of a planet since the invention of the telescope, the great planet now known as Uranus. Under the patronage of King George, he advanced to telescopes of still greater size, his largest being no less than 40 feet in length, with a speculum of 4 feet in diameter. 2 new satellites of Saturn were discovered with this giant reflector, which was dismantled by Sir John Herschel with appropriate ceremonies, including the singing of an ode by the Herschel family assembled inside of the tube on New Year's Eve, 1839-1840. We have record of but few attempts to improve the size and definition of great reflectors by the continental astronomers during this era. In England and Ireland, however, great progress was made. About 1860, Lassell built a 2-foot reflector, with which he discovered 2 new satellites of Uranus, and which he subsequently set up in the Isle of Malta. 10 years later, Thomas Scrubb, and son of Dublin, constructed a 4-foot reflector, now at the observatory in Melbourne, Australia. Calver, in conjunction with Common of Ealing, London, about 1880 to 1895, built several large reflectors, the largest of 5 feet diameter, now owned by Harvard College Observatory, and rather earlier, Martin of Paris completed a 4-foot reflector. The mirrors of these latter instruments were not made of speculum metal, but of solid glass, which must be very thick, 1/7 their diameter, in order to prevent flexure or bending by their own weight. So sensitive is the optical surface to distortion, that unless a complicated series of levers and counterpoises is applied to support the undersurface of the mirror, the perfection of its optical figure disappears when the telescope is directed to objects at different altitudes in the sky. The upper or outer surface of the glass is the one which receives the optical polish on a heavy coat of silver chemically deposited on the polished glass after its figure has been tested and found satisfactory. But far and away the most famous reflecting telescope of all is the Leviathan of Lord Rosse, built at Birr Castle, Parsonstown, Ireland, about the middle of the last century. His lordship made many ingenious improvements in grinding the mirror, which was a speculum metal, 6 feet in diameter and weighed 7 tons. It was ground to a focal length of 54 feet, and mounted between heavy walls of masonry, so that the motion of the great tube was restricted to a few degrees on both sides of the meridian. The huge mechanism was very cumbersome in operation, and photography was not available in those days. Nevertheless, Lord Rosse's telescope made the epochal discovery of the spiral nebulae, which no other telescope of that day could have done. And I think I'm going to leave it there for tonight. It's quite funny, actually, at the time this was written, they didn't know what a galaxy was, and they used to call them spiral nebulae, thinking they were part of our own galaxy. But anyway, if you'd like to pick up where we've left off, you can, as always, find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.